All right, good day everyone. This is Jason Straight with the Cloud Pass Virtual Group. Our presentation today is Modernizing Your Data Platform with Guy Glantser. Before we get going here today, I just have a couple announcements that I need to run through, or want to run through actually. So the first is that this virtual group is sponsored by Microsoft Azure. Microsoft Azure sponsors the group to help make sure that we have lots of different presenters and the ability to continue to use GoToMeeting to present these sessions. They do want you to know that coming up here on October 14th is an Ignite event with Bob Ward, where he's going to be going through a Azure SQL digital event. So if you want to learn more about Azure SQL and you want to learn it from Bob Ward specifically, he's got a session for Ignite coming up. If you are not yet a member of the Cloud Pass virtual group, I do recommend folks go out and become members. You can do that by going out to cloud.pass.org, and out there is a login to subscribe. You subscribe, you'll be listed, you'll get lists of all of our upcoming sessions, and then the newsletter will also come to you that I send out on most Mondays. In regards to upcoming sessions, we have quite a few sessions coming up. So there are sessions going later this week and in the following weeks, all the way through December, and then into the new year. We've got sessions going on right now all the way into April. So there's lots of different opportunities to continue to learn about building out data platforms in the cloud. That said, we're always looking for more speakers. There's quite a few spots in February, March, and April still open. It's always nice to get someone on the calendar early so that you know and can plan to have your presentation ready and available. So if you'd like to do that, you can go to our call for speakers. That'll get you to a nice Google form, or you can just send me an email at cloud@pass.org and get on the list. Coming up this fall is the Virtual Pass Summit 2020. If you have not yet registered, we do have a discount code that can get you $50 off your registration. And this virtual group is part of a number of virtual groups that Pass helps to support and make available to folks. Some of them focus on specific languages like Global Spanish and Global Hebrew. Others focus on different aspects of building out data platforms like data science and database administration. And what is it? DBA fundamentals as well. And I just noticed today that DBA Fundamentals has a pretty packed schedule. They've got 17 sessions that are currently scheduled. So if you are a DBA, I would go check them out. Throughout this session, I do expect some of you will have some questions. If you do, please type them into the question panel, and then we'll present those to, well, I'll present those to Guy as he's got time within the presentation. And if there are any left over, we will cover them at the end. And with that, those are all of our announcements. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Guy for his session today, Modernizing Your Data Platform.
Thank you, Jason.
Oh, you're welcome.
Let's see that you can see my screen.
Yeah, looks good. It's coming through. I'll mute myself.
Okay. Excellent. So hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Guy. I'm a data platform MVP. I'm from Israel. And I've been working with the Microsoft data platform for the past, I think, 23 years. Who's counting, right? I am the CEO and founder of Madeira Data Solutions. We are based in Israel, but we provide solution services to customers worldwide around the Microsoft data platform. This is our specialty. And today I want to talk about how you can modernize your data platform. Again, assuming you're working with Microsoft, because otherwise it's not my field. And I'm going to talk about various questions you need to ask and steps you need to take throughout such a migration or modernization project. I'm going to talk about all of those later. So, oh, sorry. Let me focus on the presentation. Okay. So that's about me. Oh, one other thing, I co-host the SQL Server Radio podcast together with Eitan Blumin. So you can get it at sqlserverradio.com. If you are into SQL Server, if you want to learn and hear more stuff about SQL Server, then we have a podcast for you once a month on sqlserverradio.com. Check it out. So before we start, let's say you want to build a new house, and let's assume you want it to look like this, but currently there's nothing there. Okay, you need to dig the hole, you need to do everything. you will not start with digging the hole, right? You will start with planning, like any other major project. And this is the same for a modernization project. And this is important. I'm saying it because it might look obvious to some of you, but I see a lot of customers just starting to work, starting to do things, just putting the media and install and upgrade or whatever it is without proper planning, and they pay a cost later down the road. And I want to talk about this planning phase, mainly about the planning phase. So my focus in this presentation is going to be about the project planning mainly. It's not going to be too technical. I'm going to talk about technical aspects of it, of course, but I'm mainly going to talk about the project planning phase and some other phases, how to look, how to plan, how to prepare for such a project in order to make it a successful project, okay? So that's my focus. And generally speaking, when we talk about modernization projects, like many other projects, we start with planning. And again, I'm going to spend like, I don't know, maybe 90% of the presentation here on the planning phase. Once we have a good, solid plan, we need to develop the scripts, the tools, whatever we need for this project. Then we need to test it, maybe several times until we feel comfortable with it and everything is working properly. And then, of course, deployment. Okay, so let's do the real thing in production. And there is also monitoring, which is really, really important. It's not necessarily going to be the last phase after deployment. It's something that you do during the development, testing, and of course, before and after deployment, so that you know what happened and whether it was a success or not. Okay, so those are the main 5 steps I'm going to talk about. And let's again start with the planning, which is the most important one. So when we plan for a data modernization project, we start with the WH questions. Okay, as you can see here, why, where, and so on. Okay, those are very important questions, and you need to ask yourself and your management early in the process. Okay, before you start doing anything, because if you don't ask those questions, you don't really know what you're going into, why you are doing it, what is considered a success in this project. Okay, is it worth it or not? Those are very important questions, and let's start asking those questions one by one. So let's start with why. Okay, why are we doing it? Okay, why modernizing? Let's say we have a SQL Server 2012 instance, a production SQL Server. It runs SQL Server 2012. It's on premise. Everything is working great. Why bother? Why do we need to modernize, to go to the cloud, or maybe upgrade to SQL Server 2019 or whatever? Why bother? Everything is okay. So we need to ask these questions. Maybe there is no reason to do it today. We might do it some other time. And if there is a reason, we need to know why we are actually doing it. So it might be because the current infrastructure can scale, for example. Okay, the traffic goes up, business is great. We have more and more visitors to the website, more and more transactions we need to support, and the current infrastructure on premise is not good enough. We are hitting the ceiling. We can't scale anymore, so we need to upgrade. We need to modernize. We need to do something better. Okay, there are all kinds of solutions to that, but maybe this is the reason. Another reason, for example, is product end of support. If any of you is still running SQL Server 2008, for example, then we are way past end of support. You will not get any support from Microsoft. If there are any new bugs revealed or any security holes, you are in big trouble, because Microsoft is not going to support you. It's not going to develop fixes for those security holes. So this might be a real problem. You might need to modernize quite fast and do something about it. Maybe the motivation is to reduce costs. Okay, now the project itself, and let's say going to the cloud, for example, in many cases, it might cost you more. Okay, but you might be able to save money in other ways. For example, if you have an old infrastructure, you might pay very costly maintenance cost every year for supporting the infrastructure. And when you go to the cloud, you don't have to pay that anymore. You start paying, in our case, to Microsoft Azure, for example, month by month, only for what you use. There are many ways where you can reduce costs, especially when you're in the cloud, due to the elasticity. You can scale up and scale down easily, and in many cases automatically, based on consumption, based on use, and then only pay for what you use and save a lot of money this way. So this is another motivation. Maybe you just want to leverage, not just, you want to leverage new features and capabilities, like the new intelligent query processing in the newer versions of SQL Server, which can really improve performance in some cases. Maybe you want to use column store. Okay, so let's say if you're using today SQL Server 2012, there is column store, but it was V1 and it was really, really limited. Okay, not really usable. So by moving to the cloud to an Azure SQL database, for example, or upgrading to SQL Server 2019, now you can really leverage column store indexes for your data warehouse, and it can really boost performance. So this might be a reason by itself to modernize. Okay, just as an example. Security is always a good reason. In some cases, you need to adhere to some regulations and compliance requirements, and maybe your current situation is just not good enough. Okay, and it would be easier to move to the cloud because once you're in Azure, for example, Microsoft has many regulations and compliance for your virtual servers or services that you use in the cloud, and they do it for you. It can save you a lot of energy and time and money instead of trying to meet those regulations in your own data center. Okay, so this is another motivation, and this is an important one. Sometimes the motivation is just to be innovative. Okay, we are using 2012. It's a very old version. We want to use the new stuff. Okay, the new features, the new technologies. We want to leverage to learn about what's out there. Now, some of you might say this is not a good reason for a modernization project, for investing time and money of the organization for doing it. Maybe you're right, but it depends. Okay, what I can tell you is if this is a reason, it might be a good reason if it's accepted by management and it has good reasons to do so. For example, if we can't attract new employees, new DBAs, because DBAs don't want to work with SQL Server 2012 anymore, and we can't tell them that we use the newest technologies because we don't, this might be a good reason. We need new DBAs. We want to hire good people. We want to be able to tell them we are using the most up-to-date technologies. Come work with us, for example. Okay, but if you do that, it needs to be accepted by management, in this case by HR as well. You need to be transparent in the organization about it, why you're doing it, so that we can then take advantage, in our case, of the new technologies. And let's say HR now can rewrite their recruitment ads and say, come work with us, we use the latest technologies. Okay, just as an example. But in many cases, I see customers, actually DBAs inside organizations, the DBA decides to upgrade to SQL Server 2019. Okay, because it's interesting, it's sexy, and they want to learn more and so on, but it's not necessarily accepted as a project by management, and then this is where the trouble begins. Okay, at some point they will not have the resources, they will not get the budget they need. Somebody will ask, why are you doing it? Okay, in the first place, why did you ask for priorities and so on and so on? So you need to ask those questions to put them on the table early on in the process. So this is the why question. Now, the answer to the why question, okay, is the goals that you need to set for the project. If you are going to a project, I don't know if any project, but most projects, okay, if you're going to start a project without setting specific goals, how do you know if you succeeded, if the project is considered a success or not, if it was worth it, okay? So again, this is something that is important early in the process, and it's based on the answers to the why questions. Okay, and when you set the goals, I don't know if you're familiar with that or not. It's not specifically for modernization, of course. When you define goals, you should define SMART goals. Okay, SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. And what it means, specific means it has to be a very specific goal that you understand exactly what it's about, not too generic. It has to be measurable. You need to define and express exactly what is the tool that you're going to use, the formula, the script, whatever, to measure this specific goal so that you know if you succeeded or not. It has to be achievable and realistic. Okay, so you can say, we want to upgrade all of our SQL servers. We have hundreds of SQL servers. We want to upgrade everything to SQL Server 2019 with no downtime and do it by the end of the week. I don't know. Okay. It's not realistic, at least not for our organization, because we don't have the knowledge yet, the manpower, and so on and so on. So it needs to be realistic and achievable for your specific organization within your budget and constraints, and it needs to be specific about time, when you need this to happen, by the end of the year, by the end of the quarter, yesterday, whatever, depending on the case. Okay, so this is important, and let me give you some examples. So if the motivation, if the reason we are doing it is the current infrastructure can't scale anymore, okay, what are the goals that we are going to define. So for example, a smart goal would be, we want to be able to serve 10,000 batch requests per second by the end of Q3, okay? This is a very specific goal, as you can see. It's measurable, so we know exactly how we measure it. In this case, we need to write it down, by the way. I didn't put it here, but it needs to be written. We are going to measure this goal by using performance monitor, the specific counter, batch requests per second, and so on, okay? And we want it to, if the average for the past 3 days is more than 10K, for example, then it's a success, something like that. It needs to be very specific and measurable. And in our case, it's realistic, it's achievable, okay? And we specify the time. It has to be done by the end of Q3. And we just don't just say something random. In this case, it needs to be done by the end of Q3 because we expect a large increase in traffic for some reason, some new campaign, whatever. Okay, so there's a reason for that. Another example, for example, if we have product end of support as the reason, as the why question, then a smart goal can be use only the latest version of SQL Server, in our case 2019, in all servers by the end of the month. Okay, we just have to, because due to regulations, for example, we can't afford to have a end of support versions after the end of the month. Okay. If it's reduced costs, reduce monthly database TCO, it's the total cost of ownership, by at least 30% by the end of the year. Okay. Now, of course, we need to explain in more details, not in this slide, but in some document, how we calculate the TCO, how we do it today, and of course, we need to do it in the same way, using the same formula after the project is done, and see if we really managed to reduce the cost by 30%. Okay, and again, we can do it by moving to the cloud, using platform as services, only pay for what we need, use reserved instances in Azure, and so on and so on. There are all kinds of ways we can use to reduce costs. We'll talk about some of them later on. Okay, so those are just some examples for the goals. Now you have to distinguish between primary goals and secondary goals. So usually you're going to have 1 or 2, maybe 3 top primary goals. So this, for example, is our primary goal in our case. Okay, so we have 1, but we can also, we should specify some primary goals related to the project modernization, the deployment itself. In this case, I'm talking about the downtime and the data loss. Okay, so we want application downtime to be no more than 5 minutes. This is a primary goal. If we don't succeed to do it, the project is considered failed. We can't allow more than 5 minutes of downtime. Some might say this is not a goal, it's a constraint, whatever, okay? But it needs to be written, it needs to be on the table, okay? And no data loss, okay? We can't allow any data loss during this modernization project. If you can't do it with data loss, don't start, okay? Don't do it, okay? So this is a primary goal. We have to make sure that we answer all those primary goals, and this will make the project a success. But we might also have some secondary goals, okay? For example, we want to set up a DR solution. And let's say we have 2008 today, okay, and we want to use availability group for that, but we don't have availability group in 2008, so we want to upgrade, or we want to move to the cloud again and use DR solutions in the cloud, multiple regions, and so on. So it's not the primary goal. This is not the main motivation. The main motivation is increase scalability. But while we are doing it, if we are going to upgrade or move to the cloud, why not use availability groups and have a DR solution as we should have? But this is secondary, meaning if for some reason we are not going to succeed in this, we're not going to have a DR, but we still have more than 10K batch requests per second, we're good. Okay, the project is successful, but we just don't have our secondary goals. Another option, reduce storage footprint by at least 40%. Okay, we have too much storage, we want to reduce it by maybe using data compression, okay, which we didn't use before. Data compression, for example, is a feature that used to be only Enterprise Edition. Starting with SQL Server 2016 Service Pack 1, it's also in Standard Edition. So maybe by upgrading, we can now use this feature in Standard Edition, okay, for example. Encrypt the password column. We want to use always encrypted, but we are now in a version that doesn't support it. And maybe move to the cloud platform as a service solution, let's say Azure SQL Database in our case. Maybe this is a secondary goal by itself. This is something that we want to do because we have we waste a lot of time and money on IT, having to do administration stuff, okay, and it costs us a lot. We don't have enough knowledge and skills in our team. So by moving to the cloud, to a platform as a service, we can save a lot of the hassle, a lot of time and money of our team. Okay, so this is about the why. Jason, any questions so far?
Nope, no questions yet.
All right, excellent. Let's move to the next question, where? So where is actually two questions: where we are today and where we want to be tomorrow. Okay, what again? It's going with the goal, but the goal is what we want to achieve. The where gives part of the answer how we are going to achieve it. So, for example, if we want to reduce costs, like I said earlier, so the where we want to go might be to Azure SQL Database because we pay a lot of time and money today on our IT team. Okay, so it depends on the goals. Regarding where we are today, there are several tools that you can use. One of them is the Microsoft Assessment and Planning Toolkit, or the MAP Toolkit. This is an old one. I'm not sure if it's still supported. Last time I checked, it supports SQL Server 2017, but I didn't see SQL Server 2019 there, for example. So I'm not sure. But you can still download it from the Microsoft website and use it. It's a great tool if you have lots of SQL servers hanging around. By the way, not just SQL servers, Windows, Exchange, SharePoint, other things. This tool supports all kinds of Microsoft products. It will map the network. You have all kinds of options there. Here is a screenshot, for example. It will map the network and do discovery and assessment of all the current instances in your network, and will give you all kinds of statistics and information about what you have in your estate, how many SQL servers. This is something that I ran just as an example on my network at home, which only have a single instance of SQL Server, in this case, SQL Server 2017. I also have 2019, but I think it was turned off at the time I ran it. So anyway, just an example for SQL Server discovery, okay? And you can drill down and get some more information from there. So this is something that you can begin with to know exactly what is the current inventory in your data center. Another option is Data Migration Assistant. This is a tool from Microsoft that you can download. It's a client tool. You can run it. It will give you all kinds of things. It will check your current, let's say you have a SQL Server instance on-prem, it will check your SQL Server instance, and it can check, as you can see here, two things: compatibility issues and also feature recommendations. So in this case, you need to specify what is the target platform. Okay, so in this case, I have a SQL Server 2017, and I specify that the target platform is SQL Server 2019 on Windows. The target platform can also be Azure SQL Database or Azure Managed Instance. So you need to specify the target platform, and it will run an assessment on your existing platform, existing instance, and it will give you all kinds of warnings and tips about compatibility issues, things that you need to take care before moving to the target platform, and also some feature recommendations, features that you might want to explore and use in the new target platform that you don't have today. So this is just an example about some security recommendations that you can use. In this case, it's dynamic data masking. I think, yes, it is. Just an example. Okay, so you can get a lot of information from there about your current infrastructure and how it is compared to the target platform. And this is something that I recommend to do anyway before you start. Okay, on an instance by instance basis. There is also a tool from DBA Tools. It's an open source project. It's called DBA Checks in this case. DBA Checks is a command line. It's PowerShell. You can give it a server list, and it will run all kinds of tests against those servers, and it will output a report. It also has a Power BI dashboard that you can use. It looks like that. So you can, again, from this module, you can quite easily get an inventory of what you have and all kinds of information about that. In here, you have some more checks, more than just inventory. So you can look at all kinds of things like last good DBC check DB. Okay, so if you have SQL servers hanging around that you haven't run DBC check DB for a long time, you'll get that information from here. Also some performance indications, and this can be useful when you are going to move to the cloud, for example, or to another server, for example, in a migration project. You need to have a performance benchmark. You need to know what is the performance benchmark in the existing server, and what should be the specs, or what should be the DTU that you need to use in Azure SQL Database in order to support this workload. Okay, so this is a good step in this direction. And there are also other tools like SP Blitz from Brent Odor, for example. This is just an example. This is a tool that I like and I use it quite a lot. SP Blitz will run, again, many tests. It's just a script, a T-SQL script against your SQL Server, your current SQL Server instance, and which will give you a lot of information that you can use. There is, again, also a Power BI dashboard that you can use. Here is just an example. So again, this is more about performance, gaining a performance benchmark of the current server before you go to the target platform. So those are some just examples. There are others, some tools that I recommend to use before you start that will answer the question where we are today. What exactly do we have today before we move to somewhere else? Now, about the tomorrow, where we want to go, here there are many questions that you need to ask before you start. Okay, now that you know the goals, you know why you are doing it, you know what you have today, now we need to take a very important decision about where we want to go tomorrow. Okay, what is the target for this project? We want to go to Azure, to a platform as a service, infrastructure, to SQL Server 2019, Windows, Linux, and so on. Okay, so the first question, on-prem or cloud? There are all kinds of reasons and constraints and why you want to go this or that. You need to put this on the table. You need to have a discussion with the relevant stakeholders and decide whether it's the right time for you to move to the cloud. Of course, there are many pros and cons. If you're going on-prem, is it going to be a physical or a virtual server? Today, almost everything is virtual. Sometimes I still see physical servers. Maybe there are reasons for that as well, but in most cases, you might want to go virtual because it has lots of advantages. If you're going to the cloud, infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. Okay, do we want to keep using virtual machines and install and manage SQL servers on them in the cloud, or we want to use Azure SQL Database or managed instance as a service in the cloud? A modernization project is always a good opportunity for consolidation. So again, if you have lots of SQL servers hanging around with different versions and additions and service specs, and some of them have maintenance plans, some of them don't have maintenance plans, and lots of different issues you need to take care of, this might be a good opportunity to consolidate, to have one strong server, either on-prem or in the cloud, or to have multiple Azure SQL databases, okay, as a service, as a standard offering, standard solution, instead of having multiple databases hanging around in different SQL Server instances on-prem. And you can consolidate and have one platform that you need to manage going forward. And this can reduce lots of costs and overhead and fix all kinds of problems that you might have today. You need to, if you're going to a virtual machine and not a platform as a service, then you also need to decide what is the target SQL Server version and edition. Now, usually I recommend to go to the latest. So today we have SQL Server 2019. I recommend use SQL Server 2019. Sometimes you might want to wait if it's just been released. You might want to wait to some cumulative updates to see that it's stable enough. There are no major bugs. People have all kinds of ideas about that, whether they want to go to the latest version, maybe one before that. It really depends on your organization and constraints. Sometimes you can't afford to use the latest because you need to run some application that doesn't support. Maybe it's a third-party application and the vendor doesn't support SQL Server 2019 yet. So you cannot run it on SQL Server 2019 because we will not have support. You have to use SQL Server 2017, for example. So there are all kinds of constraints. And of course, the edition. Okay, so the edition standard or enterprise, or maybe web edition or express in some cases. This is a big decision because it conflicts the benefit that you might use, the feature that you can use versus the cost. Okay, and there might be big differences there. So you need to take a wise decision of what you're going to use and how much are you going to pay for it. And also which data models. So if you go to the cloud, maybe it's also a good opportunity to think about the data model, and not everything has to be relational. Okay, maybe we store some data, some audit data in our SQL Server, but it's not the best way to do it. It's not the most cheaper. We pay for it, and we might use maybe Cosmos DB for some of the data, or maybe as table storage or some other things. Okay, maybe Azure Data Explorer can be a solution for some of the data. So maybe we need to look at our data model and say, okay, this must be relational. Let's use Azure SQL Database, but we can take this out. It doesn't have to be in tables. It doesn't make sense. Let's put it in a document database, for example, in Cosmos DB. Okay, so it's an opportunity to expand and explore other data models in the cloud. So this is about where we are today, where we want to go. Lots of important questions. Take the time with the right people to answer those questions so that you make the right decisions. Okay, this can really pay off down the road. Now, how we are going to do it? Okay, so once we have the answers, we need to answer some more questions about how we are going to do it. There are multiple ways. So if we're going to upgrade, if it's just about upgrading SQL Server from 2012 to 2019, for example, are we going to do it in place or side by side? I always prefer to do it side by side because it's less risky. We have the option to roll back. We can start from scratch with a clean new server, and we can put all the latest updates of the operating system and everything with the new server, and then we can migrate the data to the new server. It's more complicated, it costs more, you need to allocate a new server for that and so on, but it's less risky and you get better results in many cases, and also less downtime. So if downtime is important, by doing it side by side, by using things like log shipping or database mirroring or availability groups, you can transfer everything to the other side, to the other server, while the application is online, and then you just need to take the application offline, move the delta, the last delta, to the new server and bring it back in the new server, and this can be as low as few seconds of downtime. You can also, if downtime is not that important, you have a large enough maintenance window, you can of course take everything down and then use detach and attach or backup and restore. There is also the SQL package utility, the duckbuck or the buckbuck. Okay, those are two options that you have. Either with the SQL package utility as a command line, you can do it from Management Studio as well. You can export the database and create a backpack file. It exports all the schema and the data of the database, and then you can import that into another database or into Azure SQL Database, for example. Okay, so that's another example, another option that you have. Oh, sorry. And it's important to understand what is the target platform, and by that, what are the options that you have, because if you're going to, let's say, upgrade to a new SQL Server virtual machine, whether it's in the cloud or on-prem, then most of the options here, all of them, by the way, are still relevant. And then you need to decide whether you're going to do it with minimum downtime. Okay, so you need availability group, for example, to synchronize all the data, or you can afford to do backup and restore, for example. But if you're going to something like Azure SQL Database, then with Azure SQL Database, your options are limited. Okay, so you can do, for example, detach and attach. You don't have the option to attach files to an Azure SQL Database. What you can do, for example, is use the backpack, the import and export option. But with this option, you might have a long downtime if it's a large database. Okay, so you need to see what are the options. Let's talk about some other options. You can use continuous synchronization. That's what I meant before when I said database mirroring or availability groups or log shipping. So I call it continuous synchronization with minimum downtime. You can use transactional replication of SQL Server. This is another option that you can use with Azure SQL Database, for example, because Azure SQL Database can be a subscriber for application. So this allows us to move all the transactions, all the data to Azure SQL Database. And then again, you can only take the application down for a short period of time, move the data using replication, and then take it up again, working with SQL Database. What else? We can use the Data Migration Assistant, which I mentioned before. So the Data Migration Assistant has actually two different projects. One of them is the assessment I mentioned before. Another one is the migration project itself. So you can migrate databases using this tool. You have two options there with minimum downtime or not minimum downtime, meaning everything is going down and then it will take just a backup and restore, or a backpack, depending of what is the target platform. So this tool can automate and do everything for you. It might be a great idea for small and simple databases where you don't have a constraint of the downtime. But for large databases where you want minimum downtime, I don't recommend to use the DMA, the Data Migration Assistant. It will not scale very well. There are other options for that. There is also the Azure Database Migration Service in Azure. It's a service in Azure that you can use, which allows you to do migration between different platforms, source and target platforms, mainly, of course, to migrate things to the cloud, to Azure. So again, you have several options. for me, if you have a large database and you care about downtime and you want to move to the cloud, to either Azure SQL Database or managed instance, I usually use replication. I trust transactional replication. I have experience with many projects doing it very well. You let it transfer everything to the cloud, let it synchronize to the last second, and then you just move the last delta and you're up in the air. For at least from my experience, it's more reliable and more stable than other options that I showed here. And a very important thing you need to remember is all the server level objects, okay, like logins, jobs, linked servers, and so on. Okay, so all the things I showed you here, almost everything, maybe except in place upgrade, all the other options mean that you need to manually transfer and migrate all the server level objects to the other side, whether it's a virtual machine in the cloud. And if it's an Azure SQL database, for example, then you cannot just migrate them. You need to do something about them. You need to redesign your application somehow, because you don't have access to server level objects mostly in Azure SQL database. So you need to somehow, let's say you have SSIS packages running on the server, you need to migrate them maybe to Azure Data Factory, for example. You don't have link servers, you need to transform it to something else like external tables and so on and so on. But you need to take care of those. And also remember that it's not just objects at the instance level inside SQL Server. Sometimes you have an application running against a SQL Server on an on-prem virtual machine, and there is a store procedure that a job that runs once in a while that runs some business logic, and part of this business logic is to go and read data from a file in some folder on the server. Now, if you migrate this to another server and you forget to create this folder and this file, things will break, it will not work. So you need to take care of all the things that you have in the servers, in your server, in the existing server, that the application needs in order to work properly. Okay, and there's quite a lot of work to do here. By the way, for doing this, there are also all kinds of tools. DBA tools, for example, the PowerShell open source project I mentioned earlier has some built-in functionality for transferring all the instance level objects from one server to another. So you want to check that. Also in SSIS, there are some tasks that you can use for that. So there are all kinds of options there. When are we going to do it? Okay, so we know what we're going to do, why we're doing it, how we're going to do it. That's great. Of course, you need to document everything. You should be documenting everything. But another question is when we're going to do it. Okay, and this is important because we need to take into consideration all kinds of constraints we might have. We need certain people to be in the room. We need to make sure they are available. We need to make sure that it doesn't conflict with a large campaign that we plan or whatever, some holidays, I don't know. Okay, so you need to make sure that everyone knows when every step of the process is going to happen. You need to have a timeline and to publish it in your organization. And also who is going to participate in this project. Okay, so again, in many cases, I see only the DBA, or maybe the DBA and some developers, or maybe 3 or 4 people in the organization only participate and care about this project. And this is a problem, because at some point, other people, we need to be aware of this, and they might have something to say about it, but then it might be too late. So you want to make sure that everyone, all the relevant stakeholders in the organization, are aware of this project. They agree to it, they put their inputs on the table early on, and then you want to be transparent about it. So C-level management, for example, make sure that all the relevant, the CEO, the CFO, the CTO, the CIO, the relevant people are aware, they agree, they have their saying about this project. Of course, the R&D manager, DBAs, well, that makes sense, but also DevOps, for example, because maybe if you go to the cloud, now DevOps team, they need to make all kinds of changes to their CI/CD pipelines, their DevOps processes, because now you need to work with Azure SQL Database. It works in a different way. Also, developers, okay? Developers they want to know, for example, if you are moving to the latest version, there is new functionality they can take advantage of. They need to know what exactly are you going to, and maybe they have a say. Okay, maybe they really want you to move to SQL Server 2019 because they need to use some new feature that is not existing before that. Okay, so QA, you might say, why do we need QA? they need to be aware of the new platform because they need to test things, and they not need to test new things, new features, or test things in new ways. They need to be aware of it. Data analysts as well. Security is really important. Okay, your security team, I'm sure they have a lot of things to say about that. They want to make sure that you meet regulations and compliance in the new target platform, whether it's in the cloud or not. So they need to be in the loop as well. And like I said before, if you have external vendors, you want to make sure that they all know what you're doing. And if you want to move a database of an external vendor to Azure SQL Database, you want to make sure that the vendor supports it and they have experience with it and they are okay with it. Of course, CFO, if you want money, you need budget for that. You want the CFO to be in your side. And generally speaking, it needs to be a teamwork. You want to have a team. You want to have people around you that support you, that understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and they give you their okay, their budget, their time, their people for that. Otherwise, it's going to be tough. It's going to be quite difficult to move forward. So we answered the 5 WH questions, but there are some more things that we need to take care of, like risk analysis. Okay, it's very important to perform risk analysis in many project types, specifically in modernization as well, because a lot of things can go wrong. Okay, and it's better to ask the question early in the process, what can go wrong, and think about all the possibilities, the doomsday, and answer those questions. Okay, so if this is going to happen, what we are going to do about it? Okay, for example, if we are moving to the cloud and we are going to use transactional replication, what if we have network latency and we just can't keep up with the transactions, and the rate that we ship transactions to the cloud is not fast enough? It's going to take forever. What we're going to do? Okay, great question. Let's think about it. There are all kinds of solutions to that. Depending on the target platform, we can take a backup or a snapshot, and then only to start with transactions. We can try to reduce maybe the type of transaction that you move to the cloud. We don't need everything. Maybe we need to use a different region in the cloud to make it closer to the source platform, and so on and so on. Okay, but we need to put this on the table. Again, we need to document that this is a risk. This might happen. This is what we're going to do if it happens. Okay, just as an example. Plan for rollback. Okay, during the deployment, at some point you're going to do it for real. Okay, now we are moving our database to the cloud. Now we are in actual downtime, and now something goes wrong and it takes more time than we anticipated, and so on and so on. You need to be very clear from the beginning what is the criteria for saying, okay, cut, we are rolling back, we are moving back. Okay, we're not going forward from this point onward. You don't want to start arguing and discussing whether we are going to move forward or not during downtime, during deployment. It's going to be a waste of time. People are going to be very nervous. It's not a good time to take such decisions and make such discussions. Okay, so you want to think about it early in the process, document it, and say, okay, if this happens, we roll back, and we have a rollover plan, and we know how exactly we are going to roll back, how we're going to do it, and then when it happens, no questions asked. Okay, here it is. We decided it's upfront. This is what we're going to do. We need to plan the monitoring part. It's very important to monitor performance, especially performance of your source platform and your target platform. Okay, because if you want to modernize, and the reason for that is you want to improve performance, you want to improve scalability, you need to be able to measure that. You need to define exactly how you're going to measure. We talked about the SMART goals earlier. So you need to plan for the monitoring part. What monitoring tools are you going to use? If you are going to use specific DMVs, prepare the scripts. What the scripts you're going to use, how you're going to use them. If you're going to use performance monitor, maybe you're going to use some third-party tool like SentryOne or Redgate or whatever. How exactly you're going to use the tools? Which counters are you going to measure before and after? How are you going to compare them? Okay, so you need to plan for all of that. Also, by the way, even if the goal is not to improve performance, the goal for the modernization is, for example, security, compliance. Okay, this is the reason we are doing it. You still you need to plan the monitoring part, because you want to make sure that performance is not degraded. Okay, you did it, now you're on the latest version, everything is compliant, that's great, but we have serious performance problems because of whatever reason. Okay, we have a new Cadenati estimator, for example. So we have new plans and they are worse than before. This might happen. Okay, so you want to have the ability to very quickly monitor performance before and after and say, okay, I see that we have a problem. Performance is down in 40%. We need to do something about it. Okay, or maybe it's down 12% and we're okay with it. Okay, it's not a big deal. Everything is fine. No need to do anything about it. Whatever. But you need to know what's going on. Document the plan. Everything that I said here, you need to document it. You need to put it on paper, or well, not paper, but on Word document or whatever, and make it transparent. Make sure that everyone, all the stakeholders are they are aware of it. If they have something to say it now. We all agree about the plan. This is important. Make sure that your management signs this plan. They say, yes, we acknowledge, we agree on this plan. Because if something goes wrong down the road, at least you can say, this is what we planned, you agreed to it. Some people tell me when I do these presentations, they tell me this is a huge overkill, okay? We just need to migrate our SQL Server. Why doing all this questioning and documenting? It's a lot of time and energy. We don't want to waste so much time and energy about that. It really depends, okay? I'm not saying that every organization and in every project you need to go through all the steps and document everything as I mentioned here, but at least be aware of the thing that you should be asking, and you need to take a decision depending on the complexity of the project, the culture of your organization, the risk you're willing to take, how much time you want to invest in the planning phase, how much you want it to be robust and detailed, and how much time you want to place in documenting everything. It's up to you, of course. It really depends. If you only need to upgrade a SQL Server, a simple SQL Server, which is not mission critical from 2012 to 2019, maybe you don't need any planning at all. Just, we're going to do it, okay, yeah, I'm going to do it now. Okay, no problem. Backup, restore, I'm done. This is also some kind of a modernization project. That's fine. But if you have a very large database and it's mission critical and you want minimum downtime, there is a big risk involved here. You want to do proper planning and ask all the right questions in advance. Okay, so enough about planning, more or less. And let's talk about the development part. So now that you have a good plan and it's documented, you should know exactly what you need to do in the next step. You need to develop all the scripts and tools that you're going to use for this modernization project. For example, you might need to develop all kinds of scripts, okay? For, let's say, if you want to use backup and restore, let's take a simple example. You are migrating your databases from one server to another, to a new server, and you decided to use a backup and restore methodology, then don't use manual or don't use the UI during deployment. Because I see some people, okay, let's do it. We planned everything. We know what we want to do. Now we do it for real in production. Right click, backup, take the file, copy it to another server, right click, restore. Don't do that, okay? Because this is manual. You're doing something that you haven't tested before. It's not like a script that is tested, and you might be wrong. There's always the chance for human error. Things can go wrong. And in some cases, you don't know exactly what the UI is doing behind the scenes. You want to know exactly what you're doing. Use scripts for everything, okay? So prepare a script that does the backup part, the restore part, even the copy part. Use PowerShell if needed, not just SQL or whatever script you want to use. Use scripts, test them again, fix all the bugs that you find there. Make sure that you have well-documented, well-tested scripts for everything. This is important. Treat this process, all this modernization project, you should treat it as like any other development activity. There shouldn't be any difference, okay, between developing, let's say you have a cycle of developing a new feature for the application. So when you do that, okay, if you use sprints, for example, and you have a sprint in which you need to develop a new feature. So you have developers, they know what they need to do. And then you have your testers, the QA team, they know that you need to test it. The DevOps team is involved in this. And the IT maybe needs to take care of something, whatever. All the teams are involved. You have a very well-defined process for developing a new feature, testing it, deploying it, and monitoring it, and so on and so on. But in many cases, when organizations go for a modernization or an upgrade or a migration project, they don't treat it this way. It's something that the DBA does by himself, and they don't have source control, for example. They don't have any testing methodology, and this is bad because things will go wrong just like with any other development. So treat this, make sure that you have a project defined in your priorities, whether you use whatever tool you use for project management and priorities. Make sure that this project is there, it has its priority, all the teams are involved, they are all aware of it, you have allocated the time for it, you test everything, and so on and so on. Use source control for your scripts, just as an example, documentation, whatever you use as standards for your development cycles, use it here as well. For example, prepare a suitable dev environment. Okay, start with a development environment where you can test everything. If you are going to move from a source SQL Server to an Azure SQL database, then you should prepare an on-prem development environment with a source SQL Server that looks like the production SQL Server, and also create an Azure SQL database in the cloud as a development environment, and start developing things to move things around between the development SQL Server and the development Azure SQL database as a target. And once you're done with that, you can move to the testing phase, and so on and so on. Develop all the rollback scripts. Okay, so if you have a rollback plan and you have a decision of cutoff point where, when, in what circumstances you're going to roll back, it's not enough. You also need to prepare all the relevant rollback scripts. You have to move things back, you have to clean up stuff, whatever. Okay, prepare scripts for everything during the rollback and test them as well. Use DBA tools. I mentioned it maybe twice or 3 times. I will mention it once again. DBA tools is a really great open source project. It's free. There are many things you can use within DBA tools that can save you a lot of time. Okay, for moving things around, taking backups, moving instance level objects, and so on and so on. Check it out. If you're not familiar with it, you have a link here. Check out DBA tools, and it can save you a lot of time. So this is about development. Okay, you need to develop all the relevant scripts that you're going to use throughout the process. And again, when I talk about scripts here, it's not necessarily T-SQL scripts. It can be PowerShell. Maybe you decided to develop some console application using C#, whatever. Okay, whatever it works for you and does the job. So this is development, and then of course we have testing. Test, really important. If production is important to you and you want to minimize the risk, you need to do a lot of testing properly. And again, just like with any other project, any other development project, you need to have a proper and suitable test environment. So again, set up a test environment where you have, just as an example, a source SQL Server and a target Azure SQL database for your test environment, and then you can test back and forth. You can test everything that you develop, make sure that everything goes as expected, find all the bugs, all the issues, fix them, test again, and so on and so on. Remember that you have, if you have a risk analysis, what can go wrong and what we're going to do when it goes wrong. This is the time to test it. Okay, so during the testing phase, you need to make things go wrong. Okay, if you decided, for example, that what can go wrong is the network traffic, the latency, then there are all kinds of tools and ways to make it happen. Okay, so you can simulate a high latency between the on-prem and your Azure SQL database, and then see what happens and try to solve it based on your plan that you prepared. You might then realize that your plan is not good enough. You need to do something else, and so on and so on. But it's important to test it, because if you hit it for the first time in production, it's not a good thing. Also, remember to test the rollback mechanism. So you have a rollback plan, you have the rollback scripts, test them as well. As soon as you have tested one side of the process, everything moves to the cloud. Now test the rollback as well. Decide that you are going to do rollback and make sure that you know how to do it and everything works. And also, of course, test the application. Okay, so we're talking about the database here, but the database now needs to serve some external application or whatever process. You need to also test it from this perspective. Okay, so make sure that the developers, the product managers, your end users, your super users, whoever is in charge, tests from the application side and says everything is worked great as before, no problems. This is also important because sometimes, let me just say another sentence about that. Sometimes a DBA tests everything, and from the DBA perspective, everything works great, everything is well. But when the user goes into the application, they say this doesn't work. Okay, depending on your platform and what you did there. For example, some object is missing on the server. from the SQL Server side, it looks okay, but some process in the application failed because of that. Okay, so make sure that you test application as well. And like I said before, monitor activity before, during, and after. Okay, so when you test in your test environment, monitor there. So the best thing to do in your test environment is to create both the source server and the target server as close as possible to the production servers. It might cost a lot of money sometimes because production servers are quite expensive, but if you do it for short times, just for the test, it might be okay. You want to have enough data to work with. So test not only functionality, but also test for performance and for scale. Make sure that you can really move all of that stuff to the cloud as you plan to during the test phase. And if you have that, then you can also monitor performance, monitor the activity in your test environment before you go to production and see what happens. Okay, so even if you succeed in your test environment, everything is okay. If you monitor performance, you might see that performance is worse than before. And it's better to know about it in advance during the test and see why it happens and what you can do about it before you go to production. Okay, and also this is a way to test your monitoring plan as well. Okay, so maybe you decided to use some counters to monitor. Once you try to monitor them in the test environment, you realize that you can't really use those counters because of whatever reason. Perform dry runs, 1, 2, 3, 12, how many you need in order to feel confident to reduce the risk and say, okay, now I really feel ready to go to production. And again, it depends. For some organizations, maybe 20 dry runs are not even enough, okay, because they don't want to take any risks. For others, maybe 1 or 2 are good enough. It really depends. Once we're done with the testing, fixing everything, we did many dry runs, we are ready to go to deployment. We have a timeline, we plan for it in advance. It's time to deploy. Several things I want to say about that. First of all, schedule is really important. Okay, so make sure that everybody is aware of it. We start on a time. Everyone is available during that time. If you're not transparent about that, and not all people are familiar with the schedule, then you might have some issues with someone might be missing. You need something and it's not prepared on time, and so on. Okay, so schedule is really important here. And again, make sure that everyone is available. I'm talking here from experience with some projects during the money time. Now we need a storage guy to do something. This is the money time, and now the storage guy is not available. Okay, and we can't reach him, and we are in downtime right now. What do you do? Oh boy. So make sure in advance everyone is aware of the schedule and they are available and how to reach them. Update the users. Sometimes people forget to update your end users, and now boom, the application is offline and people don't know why, and they call the customer support and so on. Notify in advance, say we apologize, tomorrow between this and that the application is going to be down for maintenance, blah blah blah, whatever. Take notes. Okay, we talked about documentation earlier. It's also, I think it's very helpful to document the process itself. So make sure that you have someone not part of this process. Okay, someone is responsible for only documenting the activity, what's going on during deployment. Okay, the timeline. Okay, at 2 a.m. we started doing this. 2 and 3 minutes we started doing that, and so on and so on. So you have a timeline, what exactly happened, and this can be important later on when you want to investigate things and learn from it and improve for the next project that you're going to do. So take notes, follow the risk analysis. We talked about it during the testing. Of course, during the production, if something goes wrong, you need to be ready with your risk analysis plan, what exactly we're going to do when this goes wrong. And if you did it right in the planning phase, now people are going to thank you because when things go wrong, you know exactly what you need to do. You don't waste time on trying to think, what are we going to do now? Okay, you are ready. And the monitoring phase, I think I talked about it earlier. Do it during testing, during production as well. Test the application, not just the database. Monitor performance before and after, and then compare and see what happens. Okay, and you can generate some nice graph that you want to show management. Look, we improved performance by 30%. We improved the throughput by 25%, whatever. Okay, we reduced the storage footprint by 40% and so on. Remember to update the database compatibility level. Now, this is a very important and sometimes very risky step in the process, especially if you're going from an old version before SQL Server 2014, because in SQL Server 2014, I'm sure some of you are aware, in SQL Server 2014, Microsoft rewrote the cardinality estimator. This is a component inside the SQL Server optimizer, which is responsible for estimating the number of rows during execution plan. So based on those estimations, based on statistics, the optimizer is going to decide whether to use an index seek or an index scan, which join algorithm to use, and so on and so on. It really affects the plan that is going to be used, and it really affects performance. Now, in some cases, using the new cardinality estimator, you get worse plans than before for all kinds of reasons. Okay, and sometimes by just upgrading or moving to a target platform with the new cardinality estimator, you might get worse performance than before, or maybe better performance overall, but you get really poor performance for some specific processes. And this might be a big problem. So when you move, especially if you move to a virtual machine and not a platform as a service, you have the ability to use the lower compatibility level, test it for a while, maybe use query store to get some statistics about what's going on in the new platform, but under the old estimator, the old compatibility level. And then there is a point in time where you upgrade the compatibility level, and then you need to monitor and use query store. And in some cases, you might be able to force the old good plan from the query store. And again, this is an example. There are all kinds of things you need to be aware of when you update the database compatibility level. Okay, this might be a risky step. You need to take care of it in the right way. Continue to monitor, okay, before, during, and after. After you're done, continue to monitor, because you want to look at some period of time how the system behaves, and again, to be able to come up with reports and show management, this is what we achieved. This is how our system now behaves in the new platform due to the modernization that we did. And when everything is done, there are still some next steps, okay? So the first is to celebrate victory. And yes, it's important, okay? Remember to put some time aside to you and to your team and to all the stakeholders, all the people involved, and say, thank you, we did it, it's a success, here are the results, okay? Show it to everyone, we actually improved performance. We had a goal to reduce the cost by 28%, and we actually reduced the cost by 34%, thanks to you. And here is how we did it. Great, that's great. So celebrate your victory first. Second, learn from the process. I mentioned earlier to take notes. It's a good practice to meet with all the relevant people that were involved in the deployment, also maybe in the planning phase, and go over the timeline of the deployment, the actual deployment, and learn from it, okay? What went well, what went wrong, why it happened, what can we learn from it as a team, how can we improve for the next time we do it. And very, very important, if you modernized and now you have a modern data platform, you should also take advantage of all the new stuff in there, okay? So take the time to learn the new features, the new capabilities, whether it's in, again, Azure SQL Database or in SQL Server 2019, the latest versions. There are many, many, many features. If you're upgrading, for example, for 2012, 2019, there are so many new features and new capabilities and enhancements to existing features in all of those versions since then. There's a lot of stuff you can use and improve, and you need to learn about them, how to use them, whether they are important, they're relevant for your specific workload or not, but it's time to do this, okay? So this might be another project by itself, and those are the next steps, but make sure you do it. Don't just say, okay, we're now using SQL Server 2019, but we're not leveraging any of the new features. So this is a waste. That's all I have to say. I'm open for questions. Anything, Jason?
Yeah, so there was one question is, how do you use the hybrid approach for moving SQL databases using linked server to Azure SQL Database?
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sure. What's the best way to approach a hybrid solution where you've got some of your SQL databases using linked servers? Linked servers.
Yeah. So if I understand correctly, if you have linked servers between servers on-prem and you want to move to Azure SQL Database, what do you do about that? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Okay, so in Azure SQL Databases, you don't have linked servers, but you have something called external tables or external data sources. So this is one option. If you migrate everything to Azure SQL Databases, you can then create external tables that reference one each other. That's one option. Another option, you can move to managed instance, not to Azure SQL Database. And within managed instance, you do have the ability to use linked servers. And another option is, of course, to do some redesign or re-architecture. Maybe you don't really need those linked servers because today they are on different servers. But as I said earlier, maybe it's a good opportunity to do some consolidation and put everything on the same server and get rid of those linked servers. So there are all kinds of options there. I hope it answers the question.
Yeah, sounds like it did. And that is actually all the questions that we had. So just those,
Really?
just that one. Yep. Oh, actually, let's see here. We got one last that just came in. Excellent overview and great advice. One of the reasons we're reluctant to migrate to the cloud is network performance, as our internet connection would limit and add latency. So
okay, so latency is
yeah.
definitely an issue when you go to the cloud. You want to be, you want your servers, your application server, your database to be as close as possible to your users. And sometimes this can be an issue. Now, actually, one of the benefits from moving to the cloud is, for example, Azure, they have lots of regions, lots of data centers, so you can choose where you want to put your servers quite easily by just choosing the region. So this might be an advantage, actually. And if you have a global application, you can use all kinds of technologies and replicate your data and put different servers in different regions and make sure that each user gets to the closest possible server. This is something that the cloud actually helps you with. But in some cases, for example, I'm located in Israel. We currently don't have a data center of Azure in Israel. There is one planned to be next year, and this might change a lot of things here. But as of today, I know about some businesses in Israel that latency is really important to them. And when they did the tests using the closest data center in Azure in Europe, for example, it wasn't good enough. Okay, so yes, this is certainly an issue. And it depends. Sometimes your performance is really good enough when you put your servers in a region that is close enough to you. It really depends on what you need in terms of latency.
Great.
Yep.
And let's see here. Are there any benefits on-premise SQL Server over to going with Azure SQL Database?
Benefits to on-prem over Azure SQL Database?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think one thing to consider is not just on-prem, but whether it's infrastructure or platform. Okay, so if you go to a platform as a service like Azure SQL Database, you don't need to deal with the infrastructure, with DR, the high availability solutions, with backups. Everything is taken care of for you. So this is an advantage. But sometimes you want to deal with those. Sometimes you want to have control for all kinds of reasons, and this is an advantage to using a virtual machine or to using SQL Server on-prem. Okay, because you want to have control on the performance, on the storage, on the operating system, all kinds of configurations. When you use Azure SQL Database, a lot of stuff is configured and decided for you. You don't have control. And sometimes it has performance impacts. For example, Azure SQL Database, because Microsoft provides an SLA for Azure SQL Database, they need to maintain some replicas behind the scenes. This has some overhead. Maybe in your case, you don't want to maintain those replicas and you really prefer better performance. So you want to have more control. This is an advantage to using a SQL Server on-prem or a virtual machine. Okay, so this is one thing. Another is price performance. Okay, so it really depends on your workload and how many databases you have. Sometimes it might be more affordable to use a single SQL Server with multiple databases, either it's on-prem or again a virtual machine in the cloud, compared to Azure SQL databases. Okay, so it really depends on your workload and your performance characteristics. And the last thing I want to say is functionality, is feature parity. There are all kinds of features, like we talked about linked servers earlier, that you only have on a SQL Server on-prem or virtual machine, or maybe managed instance, but you don't have them in Azure SQL Database. For example, CLR, as far as I remember, you don't have CLR support, CLR enabled in Azure SQL Database. If you need to use CLR, you can't use Azure SQL Database. Either you need to do some changes in your application, or you need to use SQL Server in a virtual machine or on-premise. So I think those are the main reasons why you might want to prefer SQL Server on-prem over Azure SQL Database.
All right, excellent. That is all the time that we have for questions here today. Guy, thank you for presenting today. This has been an excellent presentation. Obviously, by the compliments that we got, people enjoyed it. So thank you very much for presenting. And thank you everyone for attending.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. Bye.